this is Melanie from Melanie Loves Death Metal, and this is my first ever review for the Heavy Metallurgy channel. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the new Leper Colony album that was just released January 13th on Transcending Obscurity. Now, Leper Colony is out of Germany. Consists of some veterans in the scene. They're not new to this at all. This is their debut album, so it's a brand new band's first full-length album being released, and it consists of Roger Johansson, who is from Paganizer, and about 1,000 other bands. The man is busy. He does a lot of work on guitars, and then for the vocals, it is Mark Grew, who is most notably known from Morgoth, but also Insidious Disease. So we've got some veterans here in the death metal sphere. They know what they're doing. Been really excited to listen to this. There's been a lot of talk in my metal realm of blogs and friends about this, so I'm excited to talk about this today. So really quickly, if you're a fan of Death or Slayer or Massacre or Asphyx, you're probably going to really enjoy this album, because this is some old school death metal, old school thrash metal, death thrash worship across the board. Immediately when I first started listening to this album, I thought for sure that this was a new Death album. And then as I'm listening, I'm like, okay, there's some influences of Slayer. That sounds like Tom Araya. And there's Massacre, and there's Asphyx. So this is a heavily old school death metal, old school thrashy metal vibe as soon as you start listening to it. And that immediately sucked me in, because those are all the bands that obviously I love and still worship and adore to this day. Most notably, I would say, you immediately hear the old school Chuck Schuldiner riffage and vocal style. It's definitely older sounding Death. I hear a lot of Suicide Machine, human influences on here as well, but that doesn't mean that there isn't Leprosy sounds or any of that. The earlier Death albums are very present on this album in terms of influences and sound. But the thing that makes this really unique and not the same across any old school death metal revival worship album that's being released is that there's a lot of Slayer sounds as well. So this is a heavy death thrash sounding album. There's got these times where it sounds like it's a Tom Araya song, where he's doing his normal yelling in a song, and they incorporate that into this music, and it's very unique in that regard. So I'm listening to this, and I hear Death, and I hear Slayer, and it's not all just a Death song and all just a Slayer song. Like, they mix those elements in a song all together, and I really like it. The first half of this album is very, very good. The first 4 songs immediately have hooked me in. It starts with the Human Paradox, it goes into Perdition's End, and then I think one of the more stronger songs, which I also think might have been the single that was released on Bandcamp, is the Surgical Endeavors. It's a 1, 2, 3 punch, a triple play, whatever kind of reference you want me to say here, of just 3 very, very good songs, engaging, full of riffs, not boring, and like I said, unique across the board in that it sounds like Death, it sounds like Slayer, you sometimes hear Asphyx, and then you sometimes hear Massacre. It's old school death metal, it's old school thrashy vibe across the board. Tar and Feathers is then now the 4th song. That is probably one of my favorite songs on this album. It's a little bit more of a simple, structured song, which is funny that it's one of my favorites, but it's the one that's getting stuck in my head. It's the one that amps me up. It's the one that reminds me a lot of Slayer in this regard, and I sing it all the time. But that is not to downplay probably one of my other favorite songs, Leper Colony, the self-titled track, which is the 6th song on this album. This one slows down the tempo of the album a little bit more. It's a little bit more of a slow chug vibe. And I really, really liked that change of pace. It's not too slow. It's not doomy slow or anything like that. But it's not as riff-laden, fast riff like the previous songs that you were listening to. So it starts off really strong. It has these really good songs that I get stuck in my head. But I would definitely say Tar and Feathers and Leper Colony are 2 of my favorite songs on here, as well as the Surgical Endeavors. That song is a really good time as well. In general, they write really good songs. There's really good guitar riffs. I really like the vocal style. Like I said, he's got a lot of range in terms of his vocal, and if you're familiar with Morgoth, there's definitely a lot of influences in there as well. But like I said, there's the Slayer vibe that gets thrown in here. Oftentimes, I'm thinking to myself, like, that sounds a little bit like Tom Araya. And then there's the Chuck Schuldiner death style of vocals. You kind of can't go wrong with either of those, especially if you're a huge Death or Slayer fan. The album as a whole is exactly what I expected it to be. It succeeded my expectations, and I really enjoy it. I think it's a very good debut album, and I'm excited to see where this band goes from here. I do want to call out one additional bonus of this album that I really enjoy is the album artwork, which I'm seeing is done by Alex Tartsis, who also did the Depravity artwork from last 2 years ago now. Amazing album artwork. Just look at that. That is just death metal as a whole. So that is an amazing additional bonus. Now, it's not all good. I've got some things that I'm not a fan of this album, so let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. There is one song on here, Rapture Addict, that I just do not like. It is the 5th song on the album. It's right in the middle of the album, and there's something about it that just doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't fit in regards to the rest of this album. It's a little bit, I wouldn't say a little bit, it's a lot polished, more polished sounding, more newer metal sounding, and it just doesn't seem like it fits well with the other tracks on here. It doesn't really have that death vibe anymore. Like I said, it sounds more of like a newer death metal song. It's a very polished album, very polished song, I should say, and it just, yeah, I don't like it. I skip it every time I listen to this album. It reminds me of Trivium for some reason, which doesn't fit on this album. Like, just in general, the sound just sounds off in regards to the rest of the songs on here. I'm not too sure if anybody else will feel that way, but that's just what I've come to terms with, so I just skip it from now on, and I don't bother listening to it. I actually would have been happy if they just never include this on the album. The other con to this is the last 3 songs of the album kind of get lost on me after Leper Colony. Once Leper Colony is finished, the last 3 songs are kind of a blur. They're not as engaging. I kind of start to lose interest a little bit in there, and it's not as doesn't really hit as home for me like the other songs on the album. It starts off very strong, and then a little bit of a lackluster, kind of the same old towards the end of the album. Now, that's not to say the 3 songs aren't good. They're obviously good songs. They're not awful. They don't make the album awful by any means. It's just that by the time I reach Leper Colony and the song is over, I start to kind of disengage a little bit from the album. Now, I feel like that's a little bit of new album a slug that happens when you're listening to a new album. You don't know anything about the band. You tend to kind of fade off towards the end of the album. For me, I feel like this might get better as I listen to it over time. I'll get more used to those songs. I'll listen to them more. Gruesome End is the final track on the album. It's not a bad song by any means. I typically prefer an album that has like an incredibly empowering, amazing song that ends the album. And this song just doesn't do it quite for me. But that doesn't ruin the album whatsoever. But those are just the 2 things that I don't really enjoy about this album that make it not the perfect album. So, what do I think as a whole? I think it's a good debut album. I think the band has a very good chemistry. I think they've created a good starting point for their discography, and I'm excited to see where they go from here. I hope they continue to make music. I think they're going to make some incredible music if they continue on, and they've got a good formula working for them. I also am probably going to buy the CD once it gets released into a distro here in the US. Even if it was just for the artwork, I would definitely buy it, but I think it's a good album. I'm going to listen to it quite a lot this year, and it probably will be one of my favorite albums released this year. Who knows? But it's not a terrible album by any means. Like I said, they've started off. It's a good debut-length album, and you should definitely check it out. That's all that I have about Leper Colony. But one call out that I do want to make, and it's an obvious call out, is that Obituary also came out with a new album the same day this dropped, Dying of Everything. An iconic, legendary band. I don't really need to say much about it, but I've listened to it several times. I think it's a good album. I like what they did. They didn't reinvent the wheel or anything by any means, so you check it out. I think it's worthy of a listen, especially if you're an Obituary fan. That's all that I have for you guys today. Please make sure to check out other content on the Heavy Metallurgy channel. I've been on the stream several times several times. It's been a lot of fun. I love the other content that's being put out on here. All the links will be in the description of where you can listen to this album. And let me know in the comments what you think. I will see you in the next one.